Hello and welcome to another episode of the CollabTalk podcast, where we discuss the convergence of technology, business productivity, and collaboration culture. As I do every once in a while, I'm here without a guest to share a topic that I care a lot about, and really something that has a huge impact on enterprise collaboration, product marketing, all parts of the business, in fact, and that's part of what I'm going to go through. Specifically, what I'm going to talk about is the power of stakeholder engagement and scalable feedback. I've presented on this topic a handful of times at conferences around the world. I'm actually developing a free and paid on-demand training to help people build better feedback mechanisms. So you could say I'm passionate about the topic from both the technology perspective, especially if you look at what's happening with AI. There's great stuff to help automate a lot of what I'm going to be talking about. But also on the process side. So, feedback is critical at all different parts of the company. And so I'm going to go through and talk about what that means and hopefully shed some light on some areas, some opportunities for you, for your teams, your organization to improve. So let's dive right in. At the core of successful business, so strong teams, thriving partnerships, is stakeholder engagement. I always say that's one of my Buckleyisms. The more people participate in the process, the more that they accept the process. Yeah, it's on direct quote of myself, but I'm paraphrasing. So whether we're talking about customers, employees, or business partners, it all is relevant. More specifically, I want to explore how building scalable, repeatable feedback loops is incorporating that into everything that you do can help you drive better outcomes, stronger relationships, and really sustainable success. It'll help you more quickly course correct where there's a problem and have stronger strategy. We all know that feedback is important, but there's a problem. Most organizations treat feedback as a one-time event. So we did an event, we had a survey form. You purchase something, there's a survey form. Or we send you an email, there's a place to go to add feedback. They don't look at it and consider that part of an ongoing conversation. It's a piece of data that we pull in at this one time, and they don't do a good job of tying those pieces together. There are some organizations that, for example, with their CRM and from a sales perspective, they really paint a clear picture of every interaction with that customer so they can better understand for that next interaction, here's the context, here's the history, here's what we can pull together so that we can better serve this customer. And so that is a great example. I mean, that's something that even Michael Scott on The Office understood, had his card catalog of notes for each client and kept that updated to know what to talk about and what not to talk about. Like the color orange, if you know the joke, if you're a fan of The Office, is this orange stood for orange, are you glad that I didn't talk about that thing? I don't suggest his methods there. But by not collecting that information on an ongoing basis, that's where companies go wrong. If you're only capturing data when you've sold something or when there's a crisis, that quarterly survey or the annual survey for like the annual employee satisfaction survey, you really are missing out on critical insights that could have prevented problems and given you opportunities to delight your customer in advance. So why is stakeholder feedback essential? So let's start with stakeholder engagement and feedback loops, why they matter. So one, it's about clarity and alignment. So feedback ensures that everyone understands expectations, goals, the current state of things. And a well-informed team is a productive team. When people understand where they fit, where they are we behind, are we ahead? Then they're better able to plan out their schedules, their priorities. And of course, a well-informed customer is also a satisfied customer. In fact, I would argue that even if the news is not good, like the customer has an issue, if you're good with the feedback mechanisms, if they feel like there is open communication and there's transparency there, then even if they don't like the current answer, they will be appreciative of that and stick around because of that communication. It means stronger relationships. So engaging stakeholders regularly, it builds that trust. It shows you're listening, valuing their input, and taking action. It's also about motivation and ownership. So whether it's employees contributing ideas, so like I'm submitting ideas through the box, maybe anonymously, that's in the kitchen, providing that feedback. If it's never read, if it's never acknowledged, if there's never status progress on the changes, the feedback that people provide, they won't trust it. They won't provide that feedback. So it does give people a sense of ownership. And when people feel heard, they engage more deeply. It's great for proactive problem solving. So instead of reacting to complaints and problems, ongoing feedback allows you to catch small issues before they become major issues. And it's also a great part of organizations that are looking at continuous improvement. So that Kaizen, the process of continual improvement. The best organizations don't wait for that annual review to evaluate performance. They build constant structured feedback loops into everything they do. I mean, think about bad managers that I've had where you get to the mid-year or the annual review and they spring things on you. You're like, wait a second. We meet every week, every other week, once a month. You've never brought this up before, and you leave it to the end and then don't give me a chance to improve if I actually did something or to defend myself against, like, wait a second, that's not what the data actually shows, and have a conversation around that. So that is something that if you've got that information, if you've got that feedback, then things will improve. So the big question here is, how do you do this at scale and in a way that is both effective and sustainable? And this is an area where, why most organizations fail at feedback. Some of the common mistakes that companies make when it comes to feedback, in my experience, there's a few major issues that cause organizations to struggle. And then there's just the consistency. Like, we're going to do this. We're invested in this. It's going to become part of our culture, the way that we do things. So the number one area where organizations fail is a lack of a clear process. So feedback gets lost in scattered emails. It's part of informal conversations or one-off surveys, and there's no follow-through. And this is my complaint about a lot of CSAT, ESAT, so customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, both of them, same problem. We fill all this stuff out, we spend all this time, and then maybe we see a pie chart with responses to things, but then nothing ever gets done. So from a support, so a couple of examples. In support, maybe a customer reports an issue, but because there's no structured ticketing system in place, the issue then gets lost in email threads. The customer never hears back, leading to frustration and churn. In HR, employees express concerns about company culture in an all-hands meeting, but without a structured follow-up process, leadership never takes action, creating resentment towards those leaders. Another problem is a failure to close the loop on open issues. So when stakeholders don't see that action taken on their feedback, and this comes from all sides, employees, customers, partners, if they don't see their feedback or progress on it, they stop providing it. So in product management, great example, a group of beta users reports a usability flaw in a new feature, but since the product team never communicates an update, customers assume they weren't heard and they stop providing insights. Or maybe research was done in the product team and they just realized that, no, there's a reason why, like, that's working as intended. We're not doing it the suggested way because of these reasons, but because there's no feedback loop getting back to those customers, they see a change has not been made and they feel unsatisfied by that. In marketing, a sales team may relay customer objections about unclear messaging, but because marketing doesn't follow up with revisions or explanations, the sales teams, they stop offering insights. It's kind of the pattern here. don't provide the feedback, or doesn't communicate action around that feedback, people stop providing that feedback. Another issue is siloed communication. So different teams collect feedback separately, leading to conflicting priorities and duplicated efforts. And a great example of this is like an engineering team they may have their own surveys and data that they collect in and their notes around projects and products and customers. And they prioritize, let's say, stability improvements, while the product management team might be focusing on new features. But because feedback isn't shared across engineering and product, the company may end up investing resources in an area that customers don't really care about. Engineering's in their silo, product is in their silo, support's in their silo. They never communicate those things. And another impact in sales is a sales team that gathers insights on why deals are lost. This is a pain point. I just was talking with the prospect customer this week on this topic, asking them questions about why, when your sales fail, when you lose to competition, why? And they didn't know because they're not capturing that data. And so without those insights, without a process to see, like, share the findings, marketing and product and engineering may miss out on key opportunities to refine the offering, to change the messaging, to strengthen documentation and training, to explain why the product, why the service is the way that it is intentionally, and help. Maybe it's an education thing, but you'll never have those conversations, and you'll struggle to answer those and wonder why you continue to lose deals. Another problem is that organizations overcomplicate the process. So if it's too hard for employees, customers, or partners to provide feedback, they won't bother. And so where is it? Where is the button that I click where I provide? Where's the email? Where's my phone number that I can call to talk to the company about this? Think about this from a leadership example. So an executive team rolls out a complex employee engagement survey with dozens of open-ended questions. Employees might find it overwhelming. I mean, multiple choice to click on things, to do things, and give an option for people that really have a burning desire to share some other information. They may go in and fill out that form. But if every field is required and employees find it overwhelming, response rates are going to plummet, making the data largely useless. You get the squeaky wheel, that the person that takes the time to fill it out, but you're looking for a comprehensive view. Customer support, an example, is a company only accepts feedback via long email forms, discouraging customers from sharing quick thoughts or reporting issues that could be easily fixed. Another area where companies failed is not prioritizing stakeholder input. When decision makers disregard feedback because it conflicts with their agenda, another big problem, it creates a culture of distrust and disengagement. So HR example of this. So internally, employees advocate for flexible work arrangements, but the leadership resists change, leading to turnover. Why aren't people happy here? Why is the time working at this company so short, without looking at those cultural things and the feedback coming from your people? On the product side, customers request small but meaningful user experience improvements, the UI changes, but the company prioritizes flashy new features instead, causing user frustration. I work in the Microsoft ecosystem. I hear this question constantly, is like, why are you releasing this new feature? Can you not go and fix the things that you've already released in certain areas? And there's sometimes reasons behind those things, and Microsoft is very data driven. But I mean, they're actually an example of strong feedback loops. They can always improve, but where they're able to go and look at the data and then make decisions. Now, I would argue they could do a better job of explaining why, when they don't move forward with the fix, of better explaining that. But I think companies are trying to do better on that. I know Microsoft is trying to do better at that and talk about, this is why we've removed this feature or made this change or added this and prioritized this over other features. Sometimes as a customer, as a partner, as an employee, you just need to ask for that. But why is that process so hard? Another mistake made by organizations is ignoring feedback-driven innovation. So organizations that focus only on fixing problems instead of leveraging feedback for growth, they miss out on a lot of that innovation. Again, I worked with a company that was so focused for too long, year and a half on break fix of fixing problems, needs to be done, performance issues, feature, broken things. But this is like the opposite side of that last statement. It's like, like, why are you spending all time releasing new features and when stuff isn't fixed? And then the opposite, there are companies that focus on perfection and then nothing new that also needs to be there. You have to find a balance between those things. With Microsoft is a great example of, restructured Windows development cycles after feedback indicated users wanted more iterative updates rather than that disruptive major releases. So they moved to the evergreen model. And then what did people complain about? First, it was taking too long for features. And then with the evergreen model, there was so much of the, this is coming too fast. It's too, slow down. There's the automotive example. So Tesla integrates real-time driver feedback to push software updates, improving user experience and safety features in a way that traditional car companies struggle to match. That's a great example. Others would say, I'm working on my PC and suddenly I get a forced update. Maybe I've put it off, forgot that I put it off, and it doesn't give me a choice. It just does it. Hopefully Tesla, I'm not a Tesla driver, but they don't do that where you're driving down the freeway and suddenly, forced update, a patch, something is updating. I don't think it works like that, but just be wary of that. The last issue where organizations fail is around feedback fatigue. So constantly asking for feedback without acting on it can lead to disengagement, as I said. So the employee example, HR department runs weekly engagement surveys, but because employees never see visible change, participation drops drastically. I'd also say weekly, that's insane. That's way too much. We've got jobs to do, or what are we doing? Filling out forms constantly. And it's the same with customers. And this is why it's important to be, contextual, to be aware of what you've done with that client, that partner, so you're not spamming them again and again and again to fill out more feedback when they've already provided that. Another customer example, a SaaS company bombards users with feedback requests after every single iteration. Too much. Customers eventually ignore them, making it harder to gather meaningful insights. So after a purchase, it makes sense to ask a couple questions. And this is why if you do it with intent across campaigns, you can get a little bit of information from, this is kind of where modern marketing has gone, a little bit of information here and there, but capturing all of that to tell a bigger picture around that customer or that partner. So what are some methods for effective and scalable feedback mechanisms? Because there's a lot of ways to gather feedback. The key is to pick methods that match your organization's culture, the stakeholder needs, and your business objectives. So here are some of those approaches. From an employee feedback standpoint, you have things like the pulse surveys. So these are short, frequent surveys that help organizations track employee engagement and morale in real time. And the key business value here is immediacy. So leaders can quickly identify and address concerns before they escalate. However, pulse surveys, they need to be actionable. Otherwise, employees will disengage if they don't see results from the input. Again, another popular theme here. There's the 360-degree feedback. And I know there's, I've got some feelings around this process. So unlike that traditional top-down evaluations, this approach gathers insights from peers, from managers, from direct reports, possibly even partners and customers to provide a well-rounded view of performance. The challenge with this model is that it's getting honest feedback. And again, this is a cultural thing. Organizations need to create an environment where constructive criticism is encouraged and not feared. Now, I've worked in organizations where people felt that they had to write more, add in, where they really didn't have much feedback there. You get very biased information out of those. It's supposed to give a balanced view, but the problem is with a lot of those is, are your people, the managers, the people that are conducting these types of surveys, trained to be able to read that content? In most cases, no, they are not. And so, I mean, that's a problem with BI and business intelligence with reading data. Again, is that we look at things through the lens of our understanding. So if we've not been trained on that, if you've been trained in psychology and out to weigh the bias of the responders, like, no. And so it's, anyway, I'm getting too much into the weeds around 360-degree feedback, but that is a method. There's real-time recognition and feedback. So you've got things like praise and Microsoft Teams and other tools that are kind of the gamification tools that allow people to add instant positive reinforcement, which can be crucial because frequent recognition, it does boost morale and retention rates. When I see that I push something out via Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatever that is, where I get like a thumbs up, or I get comments, the smiley faces, stickers, other ways of non-verbal, non-written responses to things. It's great. It's good to see that shows some level of engagement, whether people gave me a thumbs up or they actually read it. That's a question. However, organizations must balance quantity with sincerity, because empty praise is counterproductive. So what does that mean? And how does a number of thumbs up or likes or plus ones, how does that actually rate against somebody who takes the time to write feedback? So that's something that you should think about. We have a lot of these AI-powered chatbots now. So these tools can also collect structured feedback pretty seamlessly and scale across global organizations. The value here is that AI reduces bias and it captures more frequent input, but it should never replace human-led engagement entirely. You also have things like sentiment analysis tools, and we're really getting into, again, are your people properly trained to conduct this kind of data collection, much less read it? But AI-driven analytics, they can scan emails, chat messages, and survey responses to detect employee sentiment trends. Like, somebody said the right words that sounded positive, but they said it in a negative way. And so what do you read into that? And this really enables organizations to predict and prevent disengagement or burnout before they become major issues. So if you see responses that are getting shorter and less engaged, or even the response time becomes longer and longer, that could be an indication that this employee is becoming disengaged. That's right. We need a psychologist that's working at every organization. From a customer and partner feedback mechanisms, you have things like the Net Promoter Score survey, so NPS, and the simplicity of an NPS questions, like, would you recommend us to a friend? That's a great example. It makes it a valuable metric for tracking customer loyalty over time. But businesses must complement NPS with follow-up questions to understand why customers feel the way that they do. I know we sometimes get bothered by these short surveys, but again, the frequency, showing some level of transparency of what you're doing with the data will encourage people to respond more. Certainly, companies that I have high trust with, that I value, I could see like my feedback, how it's being utilized, that they recognize, hey, the last time we talked, you said this is what we've done. Like, I am more open to giving my time and that information to companies where I have that kind of nuanced and personalized experience than those that are spamming me with generics that never seem to take into account my previous feedback. You've got community feedback platforms, so engaging customers and partners in dedicated feedback forums. Again, like through Teams, dedicated sites for these things, allow for ongoing organic insights. However, again, companies need active moderation to prevent these spaces from becoming echo chambers or complaint hubs. It's like I was talking to somebody who has an expertise, came from the gaming system world, and talking about message boards and discussion forums, different forums that are out there, and how many of the most common, like Reddit, for example, can be so negative and not constructive at all. So you have to have somebody in there proactively managing that and directing. That community management piece of that is so critical there. Then you have, like I mentioned earlier, gamification and other interactive feedback. So adding rewards and points or competitions, and encourages participation and higher survey response rates. The challenge with this, of course, it's like running a marketing campaign. It's a lot more work. And then like anything, you have to ensure that the feedback gathered is genuine and insightful rather than just a bid to win rewards. So it's nice to be able to do that, again, depending on the culture of your organization and the stakeholders that you're talking about. In a sales organization, having leaderboards, that kind of gamification can be fantastic to know who's done the most deals, who's had the largest deals, who's beating out the quarter, like all those kinds of things are very motivating to that type of employee. But leaderboards in project management or in product management around features released and time to release is like, there are so many nuances, like that just doesn't work. But capturing more information around those people that are most helpful, that are they're not managers, but they're leaders in this space, and getting that feedback or the 360 feedback can be very powerful for those other people. Also, one-on-one interviews and focus groups. So too, like one-on-one or a group together, those kind of deeper engagements, they provide more qualitative insights. So there's the quantitative, the data-driven, the transaction-driven, and then there's the qualitative insights that the numbers alone can't capture. The downside, of course, of this is it takes time and resources. So they should be reserved for major product updates or service improvements where rich, in-depth feedback is needed. Those are some of my favorite things to do. I run a lot of panels. I do a lot of interviews. I've done that kind of research where we've surveyed and then we have selected people for more in-depth one-on-one and panel discussions for customers. And it's fantastic. So many insights out of that you go then and blend that information in. I weigh those interactions more heavily than the data coming in through the automated methods, but I do look at all of that data. Anonymous and passive feedback collection is also important. So we have the anonymous feedback portals where employees and customers, they might feel uncomfortable sharing honest opinions publicly. There's not a lot of people like in a town hall with the entire company and the CEO up front that will raise their hand and ask a question. You might even get a team of 5-10 people that work together every day with their manager, sit down and still not be comfortable in voicing their concern or sharing their opinion. But in a one-on-one with that person, they'll open up. Even that can be difficult. So to provide also anonymous feedback portals, people get very brave, a lot of bravado that comes out of anonymity, but giving them that method allows people to report concerns safely, which can reveal hidden cultural or systemic issues. However, anonymous feedback must be validated carefully to prevent misuse. There's like Viva Engage out there in an enterprise, or your SharePoint environment, your intranet. That's a way to get out to the larger community, your organization, and encourage spontaneous, honest feedback in a familiar, informal setting. The challenge is that discussions remain constructive and monitored for trends. So even in that closed, environment of your intranet that only employees can get on there, if you're not doing the community management, it could still go towards the negative or the unproductive conversations. Then there's also the AI sentiment analysis. That's another method to track emotional tone and trends across large data sets. It's great to go and look at all of these methods and then employ some of that sentiment analysis. I just recommend, if you don't have that expertise in-house, go get an outside expert to help with that. But that can help an organization identify, again, early warning signs of discontent. But you can't just rely on the AI, the technology to do it and to read it correctly. You still need to have that human analysis. And that's why I love Microsoft Copilot as a brand. It's not the pilot, it's the Copilot. It's there to assist. Same with the AI. Some best practices. I know I've gone through a lot here. Some best practices for scalable feedback. One is to be very clear and communicate the purpose, clearly explain why feedback is being collected, how it will be used. And that's for each of these different channels or types of feedback. When stakeholders understand the impact of their input, the participation rates increase. You also need to make it easy. The simpler the process, the more likely stakeholders are to engage. So avoid those lengthy surveys or complicated feedback mechanisms that really do discourage participation. The more questions you ask, like when I get those surveys that say, this is going to take you 20 to 30 minutes to fill out, I'm like, I don't have time for this. But if it's something like it's 3 to 5 minutes, or if you could say, look, it's 5 questions, I'm more likely to respond to those. So keep it easy. Be transparent. I can say this over and over and over again, and still companies struggle with this, but share what has been learned from the feedback and then what actions are being taken. Transparency builds trust and encourages continued engagement. When you're sharing it with the broader organization, you don't need to say where it came from, but you collect that data and say, based on this, this is the action we're taking. My personal experience is that even when I say, like, I got this feedback and overwhelmingly people want this is why we can't do this yet. That's going to be in our future version. We know this, but here's why. Architecturally, we can't build this feature, or here's this reason, or the cost for this. We don't have the personnel. We want to do it. When we have this, we're going to leave it here in our future roadmap. People will accept that because they've been heard. It's transparent, it's out there, and you've explained why you're going to do it or not going to do that. People want that. You also want to encourage two-way dialogue. So feedback should never be a one-way street. Creating opportunities for discussion, it ensures that feedback leads to those meaningful improvements. And then, of course, automate where possible. So AI-powered tools are great. They can help streamline feedback collection and analysis, making it much easier to manage all of this at scale. So you need to be thoughtful about, where are my different feedback loops? What are they feeding into? What am I doing with that information? And the other backside of all of this, like I talk a lot about change management, and feedback leads to meaningful change. When you're doing all of the best practices that I talked about, then it leads to meaningful change. So you need to establish clear ownership. So assign responsibility for addressing feedback for specific teams or individuals, because without ownership, valuable insights, they can be overlooked. Track and measure your success. Everybody likes to talk about the wins that we got out of it, the quick wins from the feedback. So use key performance indicators or KPIs to evaluate the effectiveness of the various feedback initiatives. Metrics such as response rates, and level of engagement from different organizations, and impact assessments. I mean, I love it when you can show that feedback where it's actually saved the company money. In fact, I've worked for a couple of organizations where they said it was a great way to get engagement. They said that that employees that identify improvements that had to be validated, because we don't want employees creating a problem and then fixing it, but they could get as a bonus a percentage of the dollar saved. So if it saved $10,000, they might be able to get 10% bonus, $1,000 of that. Still, the company saved $9,000. And so again, they closely watch to make sure that people weren't abusing that. But it was a great way to encourage people to look, how can we continually improve what we're doing and participate in those processes. Reporting back, again, keep stakeholders informed about how their feedback is influencing decisions. This reinforces the value of providing input and fosters that culture of continuous improvement. I've shared years ago how when I had a swimming pool put into my backyard, and the contractor, when signed the agreement and forked over a bunch of cash, said, you're going to love me the first couple of days, you're going to hate me for a long time, and then you're going to love me at the end. I didn't really kind of process that statement that he made, but it was true. Like, he showed up like the second day with the backhoe, and they dug the hole, and we're excited. My kids were excited. There's a giant hole in our backyard, and then we didn't see them for almost a month. And I kept calling, and this gets back to the feedback. I kept calling, and they would not return phone calls like, what's going on, trying to get, and then they would trickle a little bit of information. At the end of the process, we had this beautiful custom pool, and talking with the contractor, came back to kind of walk through everything. And I said, I have a difficult time recommending you. He's like, what are you talking about? I thought you loved the pool. I said, yeah. I said, your lack of communication was infuriating. I said, I realized later, like towards the end, that you couldn't move forward on this process. And that took 3.5 weeks because you were waiting for somebody from the city to come in and review. If you would just let me know that's what's going on. Like, I had to go and find out about that process, actually talking to a friend who was a realtor who had recommended this vendor, and talking about how frustrated I was, and he understood the process. So I got the answer elsewhere to explain it. They never explained that to me. That's why you need to report back. That's why you need to have transparency, because I was otherwise a happy customer, but because of the lack of communication, I had no interest in recommending this vendor. And then you need to iterate on these feedback systems on an ongoing basis. So they should evolve with the organization. So don't just look at your core processes when you're making changes, when the company is growing. Look and say, where are key feedback loops? How are we doing this? What needs to change? We have a new CRM platform coming in, a new ERP, a new partners that we're working with. Can we take what we're doing today and just apply it to these new systems, or do we need to modify those? So constantly be reviewing and updating and iterating on those to make sure that everything remains effective and relevant. Couple quick sections here I want to go through. One, I want to talk about how leadership can leverage feedback to drive strategy, because we're talking a lot about customer feedback, about product and HR and kind of all those different areas. But feedback is also a key, and I think this is where a lot of organizations kind of forget this in developing their future roadmap and their strategy, so they can better align business objectives with feedback. So they should proactively use their stakeholder insights to refine business goals. So a CEO noticing declining customer satisfaction scores should investigate and allocate resources accordingly, rather than just pushing for revenue growth. So going back and look at what does the data show? Where should we focus? A chief marketing officer might see employee disconnect with their brand messaging and engage with internal teams in shaping those external narratives to say, like, here's the feedback we're getting. What do we need to do? It might be an improvement in, again, education part of it. It might be weakness in our offering. Let's strengthen it. How? Let's discuss ways of doing that. Having those conversations is going to be critical for those roles to develop their strategy. And I think another important part of this for leadership is to understand that it's a huge cultural change for most organizations. Strong leaders, they cultivate a workplace where employees feel comfortable sharing insights. For example, I mean, Google has their 20% time, which encourages employees to pursue projects based on observed gaps in innovations. One of the teams I was at is Microsoft years ago. They had something similar. I think it was like 10% of time. And nobody was tracking that time base, but was to go and do essentially internal R&D to pursue kind of future looking projects, and data had to be accountable to that, talk about what it is, report back on the data. But again, that's something that is a great way to cultivate that example, and then provide feedback on that. Ask people, like, what are you doing around these different areas, and allow people then the transparency to share what different people are doing and to provide feedback on those things. Amazon leadership has a principle of customer obsession. It ensures that the feedback loops directly impact product decisions. So again, have ties to who owns each of these things, what we're doing with the data, whether it's transparent, as two-way for the people providing the feedback, but then building it into the culture that this is how we build our strategy. Like, getting feedback is critical. In prior roles where I was the chief evangelist for a couple different ISVs, and unofficial as a CMO with a third product company, but also did a lot of the evangelism. It was not just about ensuring like the marketing message is out there. It was a direct line, a conversation with customers that had made the purchase, and talking to them about it and helping them understand it and really get the most out of the value of what they've purchased. And then taking feedback from customers and prospects over to products. So sometimes, as the face of the company, the person who is out around the world talking to clients, talking to prospects, talking to competitors, and understanding and providing that feedback back to product was a major part of the culture of these organizations that were listening to this feedback. Final topic here around feedback loops is around how AI and automation are changing the way that we're looking at feedback. And I talked earlier about real-time sentiment analysis. And so the ability to go in and scan your content, reviews, chat interactions to detect patterns before they become a crisis is so critical. I know that there's a number of companies. There's a great example. I think it was Delta. I don't remember which airline it was, but they were using AI to detect rising complaints through social, through their feedback mechanisms, through other public chatter, to really track what was happening around keywords like baggage delays or long lines, or whatever the issue was at different airports, so that they could restructure their logistics before there's some kind of PR fallout. So it's something they were proactively looking at that, reading that, especially around high density travel days, looking at real-time data to better understand, hey, we need to get people on this to make sure to open these lines up, open up more counters, whatever that is. Automatic feedback routing is another great way to do this. This, of course, has been around for a while. If you think of like the phone tree, you call in and press 1 if you want to work, you talk to HR, number 2 if you want to talk to engineering, things like that. But you can actually better triage and get people that have feedback, that have problems, to the direct connect. And that's something that automated system can do with the feedback. So people sending in emails, responses to a centralized location to make sure that it's getting to those departments. The great thing about this idea is that, again, the problem of the silos. If product team, it has their silo, they're collecting their data, the support team has theirs, each of the different groups has their own ticketing system, has their own, like all of that, then AI now can look at those various systems and aggregate that data and show a complete profile of, even though, and then feed that back. So companies need to get better at this. I think the silo problem is still pretty major, but it is an example of this automated feedback routing. Healthcare provider, can't name names here, but they use AI to route patient concerns directly to the relevant department. And it cuts down on a lot of the overhead of routing that through and collecting information too many times, which we've all experienced with the various doctors' offices, especially in the United States, where it's like, I filled it out online. I come into the appointment, you're asking me for this information again. And it allows to collect all that information and have it centrally. There's also predictive feedback models. This is another powerful thing. I think more and more organizations are going to want to have this so that AI can forecast potential satisfaction declines based on behavioral signals. So new campaign goes out there, new features goes out there, and very quickly the AI is able to pick up on all of those signals from all of those different transactional, social, and feedback mechanisms, and quickly see that it's changing. So, and this is another great example where Microsoft does, where they look at usage patterns. So whether people are actually clicking on the SaaS products that are out there, and they've actually recalled features very quickly or reprioritized other things based on the usage of those other releases coming through this predictive model. So e-commerce is a great example of that, identifying, at-risk customers based on complaints, based on their, depending on what cookies, what things that they have in you, which is a whole nother discussion. But suddenly you're looking at competitive websites, or you're comparing other products, and you put their product in the basket, but then don't transact it and then remove it again. All data points that it can pick up on to be able to reach out with a more personalized experience for those users. So at the end of the day here, to wrap up, feedback loops shouldn't just be an afterthought or a checkbox on a to-do list. Like, we're at the end of the project, send out the form. They should be the backbone for how an organization operates, innovates, and grows. Companies that embrace feedback don't just avoid failures, they set themselves up for long-term success. There's too many organizations, they hesitate to implement structured feedback mechanisms because they're afraid of the complexity, or they assume they already know, this is more of my experience, know what their employees, their customers, or partners want. But here's the reality. Organizations that boldly experiment with feedback loops, refine them, embed them into daily operations, they're the ones that consistently outperform their competition. So if you want to drive meaningful, lasting change, make feedback a priority at every level of your organization, whether it's improving customer service, fostering innovation, or strengthening your company culture. Feedback is the key to continuous improvement. And here's some my takeaways here. Hopefully you take away these takeaways. I guess that's implied, but one, feedback is not just for problem solving, it's for growth. So companies often think of feedback loops as a way to fix things, but they should also be used as an engine for innovation and competitive advantage. The best organizations use feedback to anticipate needs and create solutions before stakeholders even realize they need them. So think of feedback as a proactive tool, not just a reactive one. Second, number two here, act on that feedback. Don't just collect it. Gathering feedback is meaningless unless you close the loop. So stakeholders need to see their feedback being acknowledged, acted upon, and integrated into business decisions. A customer who voices concerns about a product defect wants to hear when it's fixed. Get back to them. Know who complained about this. Respond back to those people that provided that feedback. And an employee who shares an idea in a town hall needs to see leadership take it seriously. So when people see results, they keep engaging. Third takeaway, feedback should be scalable, repeatable, and easy to give. So if providing feedback feels like a chore, people won't do it. Automating feedback collections, simplifying surveys, and integrating feedback channels into the daily workflows ensures ongoing engagement. So if I'm having to go out to a separate site and do a log into this other site to provide that feedback versus have an integrated feedback button right there in the intranet, that's a difference. Make it easy, stupid easy. I love that phrase. Make it stupid easy. Whether through AI-driven sentiment analysis, pulse surveys, or community discussion forums, companies should build a system where feedback naturally flows without friction. And then my fourth takeaway, experiment with different feedback mechanisms because one size does not fit all. And the best organizations, the ones that are good at this, they test, they refine multiple approaches to collecting and acting on feedback. Because you can go look at a best practice, you can hear my advice on this, and what works for one customer service or organization may not work for engineering, may not work for HR, it may not be the best solution for marketing. So having a mix of real-time feedback tools, structured surveys, and informal conversations will create that more complete picture. And then finally, feedback-driven organizations win in the long run. I mean, the data is just out there. The companies that listen, adapt, and continuously improve are the ones that build stronger relationships with employees, customers, and partners. And organizations that resist feedback or dismiss it, it's like an inconvenient problem that we deal with, or that department does. Ultimately, they fail. They fall behind. Embedding feedback into company culture, it fosters agility, resilience, and long-term success. So to conclude here, as you move forward, just ask yourself that question. I guess this is my grand takeaway here. Where can I introduce better feedback loops into my own work? How can I make feedback an integral part of decision making? If you focus on listening, experimenting, and iterating, you'll build a stronger, more engaged, and more successful organization. I'm trying to do that with my own sites. Like, I have feedback on every blog post that I do. There's feedback. Leave the comments on videos that I produce out there because I want that feedback. Always, I hope for it to be constructive, positive or negative. Share your thoughts on those things. Please share your thoughts on this podcast. Did I miss anything? Do you have a tool or a technique that I didn't somehow cover in these high-level topics? Please let me know, provide that feedback. And that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to the CollabTalk podcast. New episodes are published weekly, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and most other podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.